Module 3. Identity Theft. Terry Dean Rogan was pulled over, arrested, and placed in a Texas jail 4 times over the course of 2 years, based on an outstanding California warrant for a robbery and murder that he did not commit. How could this happen? Well, Terry was a victim of identity theft. In 1981, Alabama State Prison escapee Bernard McCandless obtained Rogan's birth certificate in Michigan. After relocating to California, he used the birth certificate to obtain a driver's license and other identification documents under Rogan's name. Los Angeles police misidentified Rogan as McCandless and arrested him several times. Not until police apprehended the real McCandless did they finally remove the arrest warrant from the national notification system. Ultimately, Rogan sued the city of Los Angeles and 2 police officers for violation of his Fourth Amendment rights. It's an extreme example, but it demonstrates the need to protect personal identification documents such as birth certificates, driver's licenses, and social security cards. Identity theft generally refers to any fraud that is facilitated by the unauthorized use of a third party's identifying information. It directly affects the lives of victims and defrauds third parties, such as banks, the government, and insurance providers. According to the Department of Justice, over 16 million people experience identity theft yearly, causing financial losses close to $25 billion. Victims may end up spending years to reestablish their credit. In this module, we will study identity theft. We'll learn about the federal and state law approaches to preventing identity theft, as well as enforcement of such laws. Finally, we'll learn about private causes of action for identity theft and remedies available for such offenses. Identity theft. Identity theft can assume many forms. It can occur via credit card fraud, where a thief opens a credit card account in the consumer's name. It can be bank fraud, when the thief opens a checking or savings account in the victim's name and writes fraudulent checks. Or it can happen when a perpetrator obtains a loan using another's identity. The Federal Trade Commission tracks identity theft complaints. Studies show that tens of millions of people are victimized each year by identity thieves and fraudsters. The most common types of reported identity theft are credit card fraud and government benefits fraud, or applying for benefits or tax refunds under another's name. According to the Federal Office for Victims of Crime, areas that may see increased identity theft include medical and employment-related identity theft, benefits fraud, such as collecting someone else's unemployment or welfare benefits, and intergenerational identity theft. The latter may include parents using their children's personal information, or an adult child victimizing a parent. A Federal Trade Commission study indicated that 16% of victims knew the thieves who stole their identities, as the thieves victimized their family members, roommates, neighbors, co-workers, employers, or other acquaintances. The Fair Credit Reporting Act and the 2003 Amendment. Identity thieves have evolved in their practices, and so has the federal government in its responses to such illegal conduct. The Fair Credit Reporting Act of 1970, Congress's first attempt to regulate creditors and credit reporting agencies and to protect consumer privacy, didn't provide a great deal of insight on what an agency should do in case of identity theft. For instance, this law required credit reporting agencies to maintain reasonable procedures designed to assure maximum possible accuracy of information in credit reports and to limit furnishing of such reports to certain purposes, but did not specifically address identity theft. Simply put, Congress hadn't anticipated dealing with identity theft issues and didn't legislatively prepare for it. More than 30 years later, Congress recognized the changing nature of U.S. credit markets and recognized the rising tide of identity theft by amending the 1970 law in 2003. This amendment was called the Fair and Accurate Credit Transaction Act of 2003, and it added provisions designed to prevent and mitigate identity theft, including a section that enables a consumer to place fraud alerts in his credit files. Think of the 2003 amendment as an identity theft victim's Bill of Rights. Under the 2003 amendment, if a consumer believes that she is a victim of identity theft, she has the right to ask nationwide credit reporting agencies, such as Equifax or Experian, to place a fraud alert in her file, to let potential lenders know that she has been or is about to become a victim of fraud or a related crime. A fraud alert warns a prospective lender that a consumer may be the victim of identity theft, and that it should take reasonable steps to verify a consumer's identity before granting credit to a person claiming to be the consumer. An initial fraud alert stays in the consumer's file for at least 90 days, and during this time, the consumer is entitled to a copy of all information in her file at each credit reporting agency. Second, the 2003 amendment specified additional protections for a person who can show that she's an identity theft victim. A victim can ask for an extended fraud alert that will stay in her file for 7 years if she can provide an identity theft report, which is a report filed with the federal, state, or local law enforcement agency regarding her stolen identity. An extended alert entitles the consumer to 2 free file disclosures from the credit reporting agency in a 12-month period following the placing of the alert. The agency must provide the disclosure to the consumer within 3 business days of the request. These additional disclosures can help the consumer detect signs of fraud and whether fraudulent accounts have been opened in her name, or if someone has reported a change in her address. During the 7 years after the filing of the extended alert, a user of a credit report or a lender may not issue a new line of credit, new credit cards, or raise an existing limit without letting the consumer know or taking other reasonable verification precautions. Additionally, as with the 90-day fraud alert, the credit reporting agency must refer the alert to other nationwide agencies. Furthermore, the 2003 amendment's specifications on the extended fraud alert stipulated that an identity theft victim who has a 7-year extended fraud alert included in her file may have credit reporting agencies remove her name from their marketing lists for pre-approved credit offers for 5 years. Other federal laws targeting identity theft. Another applicable federal law is the Identity Theft Assumption Deterrence Act of 1998, which makes it illegal to knowingly produce an identification document of another person with the intent to commit, aid, or abet illegal activity, and to knowingly traffic in or use false means of identification. The act also provides for forfeiture of property used in the fraud. A third law is directed at the Internet, the Internet False Identification Prevention Act of 2000. This law is intended to address the proliferation of websites that distribute counterfeit identification documents and credentials over the Internet. The law expanded the scope of existing federal identity theft and fraud crimes to include the transfer of a document by electronic means. Several federal agencies collaborate to enforce these federal laws. These include the FBI, Secret Service, Postal Inspection Service, Social Security Inspector General, and Immigration and Customs Enforcement. Federal law enforcement authorities also collaborate with international authorities as well as state and local law enforcement agencies. The Department of Justice has the job of prosecuting federal identity theft cases. Federal law imposes time limits on identity theft recovery, so a consumer should dispute a fraudulent transaction in a timely manner. In the case of unauthorized use of an ATM or debit card, if a victim reports an ATM or debit card lost or stolen within 2 business days of discovery, the consumer is not liable for more than $50. If the victim waits to report the loss, but still reports the loss within 60 days after receiving the statement, the consumer could be liable for up to $500. If he doesn't report within 60 days after receiving the statement, all the money in the account could be lost. For unauthorized use of a consumer's credit card, the Fair Credit Billing Act limits liability for unauthorized credit card charges to a maximum of $50 per card. To trigger the Fair Credit Billing Act's protections, though, the victim must send a notice of the billing error to the card issuer within 60 days after the first bill containing the error was mailed. The 60-day notification deadline applies even if the identity thief changed the address on the victim's account, and so the victim did not receive the bill. A creditor must also follow several deadlines. It must acknowledge a complaint in writing within 30 days after receiving it, and resolve the dispute within 2 billing cycles, but not more than 90 days after receiving the victim's letter. While the consumer awaits resolution of the dispute, she need not pay the disputed amount, and the creditor is prohibited from taking legal action or attempting collection of the disputed amount, and may not report the consumer delinquent on the disputed portion of the bill. State responses to identity theft. While federal law targets and punishes identity theft and the financial harm that flows from it, state legislatures have also enacted laws to combat identity theft. Most state laws contain restitution provisions, and some contain forfeiture provisions. Most states' laws require private and government entities to notify consumers of security breaches involving personally identifiable information. In the face of continuing data breaches, especially the 2017 breach of Equifax, where hackers accessed people's names, social security numbers, addresses, driver's license numbers, and stole credit card numbers for over 200,000 people, states have enacted additional measures and amended existing security breach laws. For example, in January 2018, Colorado state legislators introduced House Bill 1128, which was signed into law 4 months later. The law requires Colorado businesses to inform customers within 30 days if their data has been compromised. Additionally, it requires companies and government agencies to develop policies ensuring that unneeded records are destroyed, and to implement and maintain security measures against data breaches. It also requires businesses to notify the Colorado Attorney General of a data breach if it affects at least 500 people. Resources for identity theft victims. The Federal Trade Commission devotes substantial resources to assisting victims or potential victims of identity theft. It has published a 131-page guide with checklists and form letters for attorneys and others focused on helping victims. According to this guide, a victim of identity theft has 3 goals. First, she should immediately seek to stop or minimize further fraud from occurring. Second, the victim should prove that identity theft occurred and that she is not responsible for the debts incurred. Finally, she should correct errors on her credit report to restore her financial reputation and credit score. After confirmation of identity theft, the FTC recommends following the following steps. Step 1. Place an initial fraud alert on credit reports. The alert lasts for 90 days and can be renewed every 90 days. The consumer only needs to contact one of the 3 consumer reporting agencies. That agency must then contact the other 2 agencies on the victim's behalf. Step 2. Seek confirmation letters from all 3 reporting agencies of successful placement of the 90-day fraud alert. Step 3. Review credit reports for evidence of additional identity theft. If new account identity theft appears, the FTC recommends considering a credit freeze. This prevents new credit accounts unless the consumer lifts the freeze. The right to implement a credit freeze varies from state to state, but generally the consumer reporting agencies will allow the freeze even if a consumer's state does not specifically provide for it. Step 4. Contact each of the 3 consumer reporting agencies separately and possibly pay a nominal fee for the freeze. The Federal Trade Commission warns that fraud alerts and credit freezes can help, but they don't protect consumers from transactions that do not involve pulling a credit report. Step 5. Cancel or close any compromised bank, credit card, or other accounts. Proving that one is not responsible for a charge or series of charges can be difficult for a consumer, but there are tools to help avoid responsibility for fraudulent charges and to correct one's credit report. These include the Identity Theft Affidavit and the Identity Theft Report. The affidavit is a sworn statement that provides critical, detailed information disputing the charges or debts. The Identity Theft Report, for which the Federal Trade Commission provides a template, facilitates removal of inaccurate identity theft-related information from the credit report. It requires the consumer to report the crime to law enforcement. The consumer is subject to criminal penalties if she files a false police report. There are 4 benefits to filing an identity theft report. 1. It can block fraudulent information from appearing on a credit report. 2. It can prevent a furnisher of information, such as the bank, from refurnishing the contested information to a consumer reporting agency. 3. It can prevent the collection of debts resulting from the identity theft. And 4. It makes the consumer eligible for an extended 7-year fraud alert. Civil remedies. An identity theft victim can file a civil action for identity theft in many states. In North Carolina, for example, a victim can sue the perpetrator for up to triple the actual damages, or $5,000, whichever is greater. A state law claim may also be based on negligence, fraud, libel, or conspiracy to defraud. In our next module, we will cover federal laws that protect consumers from unfair, deceptive, and abusive acts and practices in advertising and marketing.